The rain fell hard, soaking everything in sight. Jake Thompson was closing his garage when he saw faint headlights flashing far down the road. It was almost midnight and he was tired, but something didn't feel right. He grabbed his flashlight and walked toward the light. What he found made his heart sink. A fancy car stuck in a ditch, water rising around it. Inside, a woman sat shivering, trying to get the car out but failing. "Do you need help?" Jake shouted over the storm. "Yes, please," she yelled back, her voice shaky. Without thinking twice, Jake jumped into action. He got tools from his truck and used all his strength to pull the car free. The rain soaked him to the bone, but he didn't stop until the car was safe on solid ground. "You're okay now," Jake said as the woman stepped out of the car. "Thank you so much," she said, her teeth chattering from the cold. "I don't know what I would have done without you." "It's no big deal," Jake replied with a smile. "Just doing my job." When she tried to give him money, he shook his head. "Don't worry about it. Just glad I could help." As she drove off, Jake noticed something strange. The key fob she held had a helicopter logo on it. Who was this woman? And why did she seem so out of place on this lonely, rainy road? Jake shrugged it off and headed home, unaware that this night would change his life forever. The next morning, Jake couldn't stop thinking about the woman from the night before. Her fancy car, her calm demeanor despite the chaos, and that strange helicopter logo on her key fob. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. At the garage, his buddy Mike teased him. "You're awfully quiet today. What's up? Still thinking about that rich lady you saved?" Jake shrugged. "I don't even know who she was. She just seemed different." Different was an understatement. Later that day, while fixing a broken-down truck, Jake decided to search online for the helicopter logo he'd seen. After a few clicks, his eyes widened. The logo belonged to Hartwell Aviation, a company owned by none other than Victoria Hartwell, one of the richest women in the country. "No way," Jake muttered, staring at pictures of her on news websites. It was definitely her, the same sharp features, the confident smile. He leaned back in his chair, stunned. Why would someone like Victoria Hartwell be driving alone late at night on a deserted road? And why hadn't she said anything about who she was? Meanwhile, Victoria sat in her office, gazing out at the city skyline. She couldn't stop thinking about the mechanic who had helped her. Most people treated her differently once they knew her name. Smiling wider, bowing lower, expecting favors. But Jake had been different. He didn't ask for money or recognition. He simply helped because it was the right thing to do. That kind of humility was rare, and Victoria admired it deeply. As she sipped her coffee, an idea began to form in her mind. Days passed and life went back to normal, or so Jake thought. Then, one afternoon, the sound of beating blades filled the air outside the garage. Customers and workers alike rushed outside to see what was happening. A helicopter descended nearby, kicking up dust and leaves as it landed smoothly in the empty lot across the street. Everyone stared in awe as the door opened, and out stepped Victoria Hartwell herself. Jake froze, his jaw dropping. Was this really happening? Victoria spotted him immediately and walked over, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Jake Thompson?" she asked with a warm smile. Yeah," Jake stammered, still in shock. "What are you doing here?" "I came to thank you properly," she said, "and maybe offer you something more." The entire neighborhood buzzed with excitement as Victoria Hartwell stepped out of the helicopter. People gathered around, snapping photos and whispering in disbelief. Jake stood frozen, his grease-stained hands gripping a wrench he hadn't realized he was holding. "Ms. Hartwell," Jake finally managed to say, his voice shaky, "this is unexpected." Victoria smiled warmly. "Please call me Victoria. And trust me, this visit is long overdue." She gestured for him to join her away from the crowd. They walked to a quieter spot near the garage, where she turned to face him. "I've been thinking about that night," she began. "You didn't have to stop and help me, especially in such terrible weather. But you did. No questions asked, no expectations. That kind of kindness is rare these days." Jake rubbed the back of his neck, feeling awkward under her praise. "It's not a big deal," anyone would have done the same. No, Victoria said firmly. Not everyone would. Most people wouldn't even notice someone stranded on the side of the road. But you did. And it reminded me of why I started my business. To make a difference, no matter how small. Jake blinked, unsure what to say. He'd never thought of himself as making a difference. He was just a mechanic trying to get by. That's why I'm here, Victoria continued. I want to repay your kindness, not because I owe you, but because I believe in rewarding good people. Your garage has potential, Jake. With some investment, it could become something extraordinary. Jake's eyes widened. Wait, you want to invest in my garage? Yes, Victoria replied. But not just financially. I want to partner with you to expand your services, train young mechanics, and give back to this community. You've got heart, Jake, and that's worth more than any amount of money. For a moment, Jake couldn't speak. This was too much, too big. His little garage, partnering with one of the richest women in the country, sounded like a dream or a joke. I don't know what to say, Jake admitted. You don't have to decide right now, Victoria said gently. Take some time to think about it. But remember this, opportunities like this don't come often. Don't let fear hold you back. As she climbed back into the helicopter and flew away, Jake stared after her, his mind racing. What had just happened? And more importantly, what should he do next? For days, Jake couldn't stop thinking about Victoria's offer. It played on a loop in his mind, her words, her confidence, the way she saw potential in him when he barely saw it in himself. But doubt crept in too. Who was he to run a bigger operation? He was just a mechanic with a small garage and even smaller savings. What if he messed it up? His best friend Mike noticed his distraction. You've been acting weird ever since that helicopter landed, Mike said one afternoon while they worked on a car together. What's going on? Jake hesitated before spilling everything, Victoria's visit, her proposal, and his fears about accepting it. That's insane, Mike exclaimed, dropping his wrench. Do you know how many people would kill for an opportunity like this? You can't say no. But what if I fail? Jake asked quietly. This isn't just my life. It's hers too. Her money, her reputation. Mike shook his head. You're overthinking it. You're the hardest working guy I know. If anyone can pull this off, it's you. Jake mulled it over for another day before finally calling Victoria. I'll do it, he said when she answered. But only if we do it your way and mine. I don't want to lose what makes this place special. Victoria chuckled. That's exactly why I chose you, Jake. Don't worry. We'll keep your values at the heart of everything. Work began immediately. Victoria sent architects, designers, and engineers to assess the garage. They expanded the space, adding state-of-the-art equipment, training rooms, and a waiting area that felt more like a cozy cafe than a repair shop. Jake worked closely with them, ensuring every change reflected his vision. The biggest addition was a mentorship program for young mechanics. Jake had always wanted to teach kids who didn't have opportunities elsewhere, and now he could. With Victoria's resources, they recruited students from local schools, offering free training and apprenticeships. At first, Jake felt out of place in the new setup. The polished floors and high-tech tools were a far cry from the gritty garage he'd grown up in. But as he watched teenagers eagerly learning skills that could change their lives, he realized this was exactly where he belonged. One evening, as Jake locked up the newly renovated garage, Victoria approached him. How does it feel? She asked, gesturing to the building behind them. Unreal, Jake admitted with a laugh. I still can't believe this is real. It's very real, Victoria said firmly. And it's all because of you. Never forget that. Jake smiled, feeling a sense of pride he hadn't known was possible. For the first time, he allowed himself to dream bigger, to imagine a future where his work made a lasting impact. As weeks turned into months, Jake's garage transformed into a beacon of hope for the community. The mentorship program flourished, with young mechanics pouring in eager to learn. Jake took them under his wing, teaching not just technical skills but also the importance of hard work, integrity, and kindness. Victoria stayed involved, visiting regularly to check on progress and offer guidance. She often joined Jake in meetings with local leaders, discussing ways to expand the program further. Together, they secured funding to open similar facilities in neighboring towns, spreading their mission far beyond the original garage. The media caught wind of the story, and soon Jake found himself featured in newspapers and TV interviews. Reporters marveled at how a chance encounter on a rainy night had led to such a profound partnership. But Jake always redirected the attention back to the people who mattered most: the students, the staff, and the community. One day, during a graduation ceremony for the first group of apprentices, Jake stood on a small stage, looking out at the sea of smiling faces. These kids, once unsure of their futures, now held certificates that could lead to stable jobs, brighter prospects, and maybe even dreams they hadn't dared to dream before. "This isn't just my success," Jake said, addressing the crowd. "It's ours. Every one of you has worked hard to get here, and I couldn't be prouder. Remember, no matter where life takes you, never forget where you came from, and always pay it forward." The applause was thunderous, echoing through the newly built training hall. Victoria sat in the front row, clapping along with tears in her eyes. She had seen countless businesses succeed under her leadership, but this felt different. This wasn't just about profit or growth, it was about impact. Afterward, as Jake mingled with graduates and their families, a teenage boy approached him nervously. "Mr. Thompson?" he said, holding out a hand. "Thank you. You saved me." Jake frowned, confused. "Saved you? From what?" "My dad lost his job last year," the boy explained. "We didn't have money for college or anything. But then I heard about your program. Now I've got a skill and a future." Jake shook the boy's hand, his throat tight with emotion. Moments like these reminded him why he'd agreed to take the leap of faith Victoria had offered. That night, as Jake drove home, he reflected on how much had changed since that stormy evening. A single act of kindness had sparked a chain reaction, touching lives in ways he never imagined. And it wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Months later, Jake stood outside the garage early one morning, watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. The once small building now gleamed with purpose, its parking lot filled with cars waiting for service and students arriving for class. It was a far cry from the struggling shop he'd barely kept afloat just a year ago. As he sipped his coffee, Jake thought about the journey that had brought him here. That rainy night, Victoria's helicopter landing out of nowhere, the doubts and fears he'd faced. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. He had started with nothing but a willingness to help someone in need, and look where it had led him. Inside, the sound of laughter and chatter signaled the start of another busy day. Jake smiled as he recognized the voice of a former apprentice who had recently been hired full-time. "Hey, boss," the young man called out. "Got a minute? Need your advice on something." "Always," Jake replied, stepping inside. Later that afternoon, Victoria arrived unexpectedly. She walked through the bustling garage, nodding approvingly at the organized chaos around her. When she found Jake, she pulled him aside. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "You've done more than I ever hoped for." Jake chuckled. "Funny, I was just thinking the same thing about you. None of this would have happened without you taking a chance on me." Victoria shook her head. "It wasn't a chance. It was an investment in the right person." They shared a quiet moment, both aware of how much their lives had intertwined since that fateful night. For Jake, it wasn't just about success anymore. It was about legacy, the idea that kindness could create ripples far beyond what anyone expected. As the day ended and Jake locked up the garage, he paused to glance at the helicopter logo etched into a plaque near the entrance, a gift from Victoria commemorating their partnership. Beneath it were the words, "Kindness builds bridges. Courage changes lives." Jake smiled softly. Life had thrown him challenges, but it had also given him opportunities he never saw coming. And as he drove home under the starlit sky, he knew one thing for sure. No matter what lay ahead, he'd continue paying it forward, one act of kindness at a time.